ally, Cody Shearer. Plus, a former State Department official confirms what congressional Republicans have been saying by admitting that he was sharing anti-Trump opposition research from friends of the Clintons with the dossier author, Christopher Steele. That and so much more in our breaking news opening monologue. All right, brand new tonight, Politico out with an explosive report about potential deep state spying on a former top Trump advisor. Here's their headline: FBI surveillance of Carter Page might have picked up Bannon. Now, according to the reporting, Carter Page was being surveilled by the FBI last January during the presidential transition when Page had a phone call about Russia with former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon. Now, according to Politico, Page made this shocking revelation during congressional testimony, and Page said at the time that Bannon called him about canceling a planned television appearance, and then Page eventually brought up the phony dossier, which BuzzFeed had published just a day earlier on January 10th. Now, it's not certain if the conversation with Bannon was picked up by the FBI, but national security experts, they're telling Politico that it's very possible that it did happen. Now, investigative reporter Cheryl Atkinson, who says the Obama administration, you may remember, she said they hacked her computers, made this very profound point on the show earlier this week. Let's take a look at this.
I was told even before Donald Trump announced for office that Intel officials, and I was told this by insiders, have sometimes been using bad information to bring to the FISA court to wrap up other people that are the true targets that they can't get a warrant against, but to wrap them up in incidental targeting different ways without maybe a direct warrant.
Wow, this is beyond shocking, and it's raising some very serious questions given the other information that we already know. Now, according to two Republican memos, the FBI lied to the FISA court. Remember, they used a Clinton bought and paid for Russian dossier. They never verified or corroborated it in order to get a warrant to spy on Carter Page. Now, remember the Grassley-Graham memo that detailed how Comey never bothered to verify all this anti-Trump information in the dossier that Christopher Steele had put together because he thought, well, the former British spy was credible in the past. Now, that same memo also uncovers how the bulk of the FISA application the FBI presented to the FISA judge consisted of the dossier that they never verified. This is unbelievable. And we also know that Comey told then President-elect Trump that the dossier was salacious and unverified during the transition. That was, what, 2 months before. And the dossier was good enough to get a FISA warrant, but it was unverified and salacious. This entire scandal now reeks of corruption beyond anything which we have seen before. In other words, what he's admitting here, what we're seeing here, is the powerful tools that we give our intelligence community to protect us were abused to spy on an opposition campaign during an election and before an election and after an election. Now, also tonight, Fox News has obtained House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes' letter requesting transcripts of Carter Page's FISA court hearings. This is important. Now, Chairman Nunes is asking for, quote, any relevant FISA court hearings associated with the initial FISA application or subsequent renewals related to electronic surveillance of Carter Page. I'd like to see him, too. Now, the House committee is setting a February 16th deadline. That's 1 week from tonight for the court to provide those transcripts if they, in fact, have them. Now, getting these transcripts would be a massive development because, as we have been explaining night after night, we know the top echelon of the FBI, again, they relied almost exclusively on this Hillary Clinton bought and paid for dossier to get that warrant. And then, of course, on Carter Page. And they didn't tell the FISA court that the dossier was, in fact, bought and paid for with about $12 million of monies paid for by Hillary Clinton and the DNC funneled through the same law firm. Now, we're following this developing story because this is key in all of this. How could you use an unverified Russian propaganda dossier to get a FISA warrant to spy on an opposition candidate and an incoming president? All right. Also, other breaking news this hour, another new explosive report. According to ABC News, Senate investigators, they are examining a second anti-Trump dossier. Now, this was put together by longtime Clinton ally, a guy by the name of Cody Shearer. And according to ABC, the Senate Intelligence Committee is now trying to set up an interview with Shearer, who reportedly is claiming that he put together the second dossier as, quote, an independent journalist. Now, nobody's buying that because, according to The Guardian, Shearer has ties going all the way back to when Bill Clinton was president in the 90s. Now, we did reach out to Shearer for comment. Shocking. He didn't get back to us. And we're also learning tonight that the State Department was, in fact, involved in obtaining and then spreading phony anti-Trump information during the campaign. Really? And a former top-ranking official at the department that Hillary Clinton used to run is admitting in a Washington Post op-ed that he was in contact with Christopher Steele also, and that Clinton confidant Sid Vicious Blumenthal gave him information that came from Cody Shearer, who we just told you about. Now, this is a striking admission from the State Department because, remember, Christopher Steele used the information. It was never verified. Clinton paid for it. Her friends are feeding Steele. Nobody verifies it. And then it's used as a basis for a FISA warrant. And you got this guy, Jonathan Weiner. It matches exactly what the memo put together by Senators Grassley and Graham exposed earlier this week when we got the unredacted version. And, of course, we have Congressman Devin Nunes. Well, he told us in an interview earlier this week that his committee is now investigating the State Department and their involvement in this. Now, in an op-ed entitled Devin Nunes is investigating me, here's the truth. Well, Weiner says that he met with Christopher Steele in Washington in September 2016 to talk about information in the dossier, after which Weiner goes on to explain about the dossier, quote, I was allowed to review but not to keep a copy of these reports to enable me to alert the State Department. I prepared a two-page summary. I shared it with Nuland, who indicated that, like me, she felt the Secretary of State needed to be aware of this material. So former Obama Secretary of State John Kerry may also be involved in this scandal, which is why he needs to now answer questions under oath about what he knew, when he knew it, and if he ever saw this dossier, what he knew about the dossier. Now, Weiner then goes on to write how later that month that he talked with his friend Sid Vicious Blumenthal, best friend of the Clintons, and Weiner admits, quote, he, talking about Blumenthal, showed me notes gathered by a journalist I didn't know, Cody Shearer, that alleged the Russians had compromising information on Trump of a sexual and financial nature. And what struck me was how some of these materials echoed Steele's, but appeared to involve different sources. So Weiner then goes on to write, on my own, I shared a copy of these notes with Steele to ask for his professional reaction. He told me it was potentially collateral information. And I asked him what he meant by that, and he said that it was similar but separate from the information he had gathered from his sources. By the way, Russian sources. And then he writes, I agreed to let him keep a copy of the Shearer notes. Now, Weiner goes on to say that Christopher Steele shared the information that he gave him to the FBI. Do you see how unbelievable this is? Now, we reached out to Blumenthal for comment. He's not responding to our request. So this whole scandal starts with Hillary Clinton, remember, rigging the primary against Bernie Sanders. Why Bernie people aren't more mad, I don't know. Then she tried to rig the general election against Donald Trump. She pays for a phony Russian propaganda dossier filled with Russian government lies and propaganda. The FBI then takes that bought and paid for dossier. They don't tell the FISA judge the truth to go out and get a warrant to spy on the Trump campaign before the election, and then they use it after the election. And there's now concerns that Steve Bannon, former top Trump aide, well, that he might have been caught up in incidental surveillance. And by the way, there might be a lot of other people. And we're also learning that in addition to the Clinton campaign, well, we have Hillary's allies. They're feeding anti-Trump dirt to the State Department, which is sharing it with Christopher Steele. Like we've been telling you, sit tight. If you think this is bad right now, I promise you it's going to only get worse. What we have now is a sliver of the information. It's coming out day by day. I've been warning you from the beginning. This is Watergate on steroids. And as you can see, this gets more corrupt by the day. Here now with information, new information, Fox News contributor, investigative reporter Sarah Carter, also Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett. All right, let's try and break this down. I talked to a very good friend of mine today, Sarah, really smart guy. My best friend from third grade, John Gomez, he's a lawyer in his own right, and he says, this is hard for him to follow every night, and we're trying to, lay the foundation, bring the new information in, and try and make it explainable, because the level of corruption is so deep, it's hard to follow every single aspect of this.
It is. But if you just lay out the facts, Sean, here you have the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC paying for a dossier that is being gathered by a foreign agent, a British foreign agent. That British foreign agent is using Russians to gather information. Then you have members of the Hillary Clinton campaign, people that were close to her and her husband, actually gathering their own separate dossier and then feeding that information to the British foreign agent who's trying to get the FBI to open an investigation into then candidate Trump and then President-elect Trump. It's really quite simple, and it's as simple as that. And for people who were so afraid of the Russians, for people who were so terrified in those last years of Russian interfering in the election, they had no problem accepting information from Russian FSB agents, former KGB agents, disinformation that was never verified, and then lying to the FISC court about this. And I'm going to tell you this, one of the things they'll discover in those FISC court applications is the fact that even the FBI never, it wasn't just a footnote, they never admitted that they actually knew. They only speculated that it might be political. They only speculated.
It was a
footnote. My words on that. It was a footnote.
But that's a purposeful deception and omission to the FISA court. That is beyond material. That would have been a game changer for any fair judge.
That's right, and it was deceptive. It was deceptive even in its own footnote statement. Wouldn't it have been easier to just go to the judge and say, look, we know that the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee were paying for this dossier? That would have been a lot easier than trying to bury it in a footnote. And so, in fact, that footnote was very deceptive in itself, because that footnote did not directly state that the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC paid for that document.
So you got, Greg, you got Clinton hit people, known hit people, literally, making up information, feeding it all to Steele. Steele is, we learned in the unredacted Grassley-Graham memo that, in fact, the information they got, it's the bulk of the FISA, it's unverified. They don't tell the FISA judge where it comes from. So you got basically everybody feeding this big lying narrative to each other, and then they lie before a judge and they get a warrant. Okay, and it's all designed to impact a presidential election. And they did it successfully in some ways. They got the warrant.
Sure, and I was just reading the declassified opinion of the Chief Judge of the FISA court. It was declassified 9 months ago. It's 99 pages long. And what it tells me is that the Department of Justice and the FBI knew they could get away with it, because this judge points out repeated acts of incomplete and misleading filings before the FISA court. So the FBI and the Department of Justice likely knew that they could go into that judge, the first one and then 3 thereafter, and conceal evidence and deceive the judge, and the judge probably wouldn't know any better because they'd gotten away with it so many times before. So they use all of this information that's paid for and now we're learning put together in part by the Clintons and their allies. And the Department of Justice and the FBI knew, this stuff was all fabricated. Look at the dossier. It's a joke. But they sort of hid that from the judge, and they used it as a pretext to go after and destroy Donald Trump. And it's an American tragedy.
Let me stay on this. And Sarah, you and John, May 25th last year, you were on this program talking about it, how the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court blasted, literally ripped to shreds the Obama administration for breaking not only America's surveillance laws, but blatantly violating the Constitution. Those aren't my words. Those are the judge's words.
Those were the judge's words. That came from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. They did blast them, Sean. They said that they stepped all over the Fourth Amendment. They were conducting warrantless searches. They knew that. They knew that they were violating the rules and regulations. And they said, look, the FBI cannot self-regulate. It can't watch itself. There needs to be changes. There were a lot of things that did change, but a lot of things that haven't changed, as we've seen. And I think that this calls for further investigation. I know that The House Intelligence Committee, the Senate Committee is also looking into this, the Judiciary and others. They're going to look at what happened with our intelligence apparatus and whether or not that was weaponized against our own people. And I think Carter Page is just one example of many.
We need to, Greg, get to the crimes that potentially are committed here. I mean, misrepresenting information to a court is bad enough, but it suggested in the Grassley-Graham unredacted memo that they had actually seen all 4 FISA warrant applications. So I'm assuming Charles Grassley and Lindsey Graham saw them. So they are available in some capacity, as Devin Nunes, I believe, is asking for this information tonight.
Right, and they have probably already identified the felony statutes that were likely broken by the FBI and the Department of Justice, their abuse of power and perjury. What will be critical is, as you reported, and actually we talked about it 2 nights ago, is that Nunes is now requesting the presiding judge to provide the transcripts of all 4 of those FISA hearings, to get to the bottom of the false representations, the fraud upon the court that was perpetrated during those hearings. And if those transcripts provide that evidence, then charges must be brought against officials at the Department of Justice and FBI.
But if the FBI and James Comey knew, if he knew that he was, that footnote that it may have political origins, and they know darn well it was bought and paid for by Hillary, and if they even knew on top of it that Hillary aides were feeding this, and remember, go back to the Grassley-Graham unredacted. They're saying this is Russian government lies. They said government, right. The Russian government, in that Christopher Steele is putting in that information. Yeah, I mean, it's the irony in all of this is insane. Just like the irony of Uranium One is that we're giving Russia 20% of our uranium. We've heard a year about Russia, and now we have real evidence.
That you can't rely on evidence that comes from a source in Russia or sources in Russia who are experts on lying and deception and disinformation. Nor can you rely on a former spy in Great Britain who's trained in the same thing. And then you factor in that it was political research paid for by the opponent of the target. I mean, you can't make up such deception and fraud if you tried.
How could you ever present what the Grassley-Graham memo is saying, Sarah? Unverified Russian government information that Hillary paid for to get a warrant to spy on an opposition party.
Well, the Grassley and Graham memo basically substantiated everything that Nunes was saying in his own memo. And it went further, and it went further. It implicated them in criminal acts, and this is why they want to speak to Christopher Steele. This is the reason why they want more information. And I tell you this, Sean, in March, when the IG report comes out, and hopefully we've been hearing it's going to be the first weeks of March or by mid-March, I think it's going to be an explosion of information that we didn't even know. The focus on Andrew McCabe, the deputy director of the FBI, former deputy director of the FBI, all of the other things that come into play with the Clinton server investigation. Those things will be so relevant, and they won't be able to dismiss those facts.
Because the fix was in, Sarah. The fix was in. It was rigged by Comey. It was rigged by Peter Strzok. What are the statute of limitations? I don't know if you know off the top of your head on the Clinton email server, considering the fix was in, Greg. That's important fact,
well,
I think.
some of the statutes are 5 years, so they may have run. Others have not run as yet. So on that basis alone, there ought to be a second special counsel appointed, reopen it, and quickly re-examine the evidence, send it to a grand jury, which is where it should have gone to begin with. Let a grand jury decide whether there's sufficient compelling evidence that Hillary Clinton committed a myriad of crimes. I guarantee you, if an honest grand jury looked at it, she would be indicted.
Unbelievable. I agree with you, too. All right, thank you both. We appreciate it. We have more breaking news from Washington tonight. Ed Henry has a report. Also, Dr. Sebastian Gorka, Herman Cain, so much more. Breaking Friday News Night. We're glad you're with us. All right, joining us now with more reaction to tonight's opening monologue and the huge news we've had all week, former Deputy Assistant to the President and Fox News National Security Strategist Sebastian Gorka and Fox News contributor Herman Cain. You know, Dr. Gorka, think of what we had. A week ago today, we got the House Intel, the Nunes memo. Then we got the Senate memo on Monday. Then we got the unredacted version on Tuesday. Then we find out that the Uranium One informant testified before 3 committees in Washington. The great irony here is that we're learning that there was real Russian problems in the election. And that's Hillary paying for Russian lies that then gets used as a foundation for a FISA warrant, and that we knew.
Right, Sean. So if you want to see chapter and verse, just go to Peter Schweizer's book or watch the free video online on YouTube. Clinton Cash documents all of this, whether it's Uranium One, whether it's Haiti, whether it's all the corruption that's connected to how this woman and her husband became multi-millionaires after being public servants all their life. So number one, it's all laid out there. But let's look at the recent charges and the recent things that we've learned from Devon and from Senator Grassley. The left loves to talk about Watergate. You know, the movies, constant references. What was Watergate? Allegedly the biggest political scandal in modern times in America, which was about the cover-up, just the cover-up, of one bungled burglary. What do we have in this case? Not one event and the cover-up. We have a systematic weaponization of federal government under Obama. This isn't just about FISA, about illegally spying on American citizens. It's the IRS. It's DOJ. It is again and again and again. And look at the trail of bodies already. What is it? Today we have the eighth person. The eighth person. Right?
Either demoted, fired, or retired.
Or moved on. That's before we know the whole story, Sean. 8 already. This is perhaps the inflection point. I am waiting for those FBI agents, those analysts, those DOJ employees who have been suffering in silence, who have been afraid, but now there's a point where they see it's going to come out. So get in front of it now and tell us what you know.
Well, I know many of the rank and file are, and we've gone to great pains on this program to make sure our audience understands this is not rank and file FBI. This is not rank and file intelligence. This is not rank and file of the DOJ. This is the upper echelon, and we have a cast of characters abusing power. Herman, historically, I don't see a bigger abuse of power corruption scandal in our history as big as this one.
Neither have I. This is the absolute biggest. I commend you and your staff for continuing to report the facts and connect the dots. There is no question that some laws have been broken, but due process takes time. Somebody should go to jail, and all roads lead to the Clintons or somebody associated with the Clintons, but it's going to take due process and some time before all of the dots are connected. When there was a cover-up, as Dr. Gorka talked about, that's one thing. And when it was exposed, it was out there almost immediately. This isn't a cover-up. It started out, it was supposed to be about the Trump administration or candidate Trump and his people. Now we know it wasn't. It was the Democrats, the Clintons, and it was all about Hillary Clinton's campaign.
Isn't that the most ironic thing here? It's
Yes.
a great irony that
Yes.
it was, you know, look at the Graham-Grassley memo. It's not only Russian. They talked about Russian government lies fed to Steele that then is used unverified by anybody to get a FISA warrant. I mean, and the Uranium One deal, same thing. They knew about Clinton, Putin operatives in this country. Robert Mueller was the FBI director. We had a spy with him. We'll talk about it in the next segment.
Sure, but we need to understand the enormity of this. So number one, it's perversion of justice to illegally spy upon an innocent American, number one, which means it can happen to anybody watching this TV show. But at the same time, when is this illegal spying happening? During a presidential election. So what we're talking about is trying to pervert a presidential election by giving the FBI your tainted information to get that warrant. That's a high crime, Sean. That goes right to the essence of this republic's constitutional order.
Yeah. You know, Herman Cain, what I'm hoping for here is that we're able to get to the bottom of it. But if we get to the bottom of it, if this Inspector General report, which is coming out in a couple of weeks, is all that we expect it is, it all is going to go back to the fact that Hillary Clinton was protected, and where any other American would have gotten arrested, because we have a special category for the Clintons, and there was a massive rigging of the crime she committed. This, you know, people say, well, why are you talking about Clinton, Hannity? Because if we did the things she did with deleting subpoenaed emails and putting it in a mom-and-pop shop bathroom closet and using bleach bit and hammers, I think we would probably all be arrested.
Absolutely. We will get to the bottom of it, because the more and more we reveal what the facts are, eventually we will get to the bottom of it. It's not going to go away.
All right, guys, thank you both. We appreciate it. All right, when we come back, we had 3 congressional committees here from the informant on the issue of Uranium One. Well, the person that broke that story, the author of Clinton Cash, Peter Schweitzer, has a full report next. All right, it is one of the biggest, most egregious Clinton scandals. It will not go away. For years, right here on this program, we've been telling you about the highly unusual sale of a company called Uranium One to a Russian state-owned energy company. Now we can report that an FBI informant is telling Congress that Russia paid millions of dollars to a lobbying firm in order to influence Hillary Clinton while she was working as Secretary of State. Now, we did, in fact, reach out to the lobbying firm involved, APCO. They gave us a statement. It reads in part, quote, APCO never worked for Uranium One or on their CFIUS matter, period. And APCO also said their work for 10X, the Clinton Global Initiative, never was connected. Now, a spokesperson for Hillary Clinton is calling these developments, quote, a charade. Here with reaction is the person who actually broke this story on Uranium One years ago, the author of the best-selling book Clinton Cash, the untold story of how and why foreign governments and businesses helped make Bill and Hillary Clinton rich, Peter Schweitzer. So what is amazing, you wrote about this in Clinton Cash, and you talked about $145 million kickback to the Clinton Foundation with all the actors involved in this. This week, you know, we had been hearing about an informant that had infiltrated Vladimir Putin's operation in America to get a foothold in the uranium market in America. He was there from the get-go. He was there before CFIUS ever signed off. And he found all of this evidence. Operatives are in this country committing crimes, wanting uranium. Why did they ever let this deal go through when we don't have enough uranium?
Well, it's a great question, Sean, and that's been one of the mysteries. You know, you can look back at it's 2010 when this takes place. Maybe there are some people in the Obama administration, you know, misguided and naive, who think this is going to help with the Russian reset, and it's a stupid decision. And that may have been part of the motivation. But when you look at the fact that Hillary Clinton, who was hawkish on these type of CFIUS issues, in other words, she has a history of opposing precisely these kinds of deals, came out and supported this deal, along with the fact that money was flowing to her husband in speaking fees and also to the Clinton Foundation. The key question is, what was their motivation? And
well, we
all
do know
along
this.
the way, Sean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we know the testimony before 3 congressional committees this week of this informant who was there from the get-go. He was telling them that those people involved in this deal were very confident the 9 separate departments that were needed to sign off, the CFIUS group, were going to because of Clinton influence. So that's interesting, especially when you follow the money.
That's exactly right, Sean. And, you know, what you can do in a case like a witness like this is look at what he has said and whether those facts have borne out. You know, he was a mole that was talking about kickbacks and extortion by Russian officials. That was found by the Department of Justice. People went to jail. This is a guy who was talking about how the Russians wanted to corner the world uranium market. Well, there are State Department cables and other evidence that corroborate what he's saying there. This is an individual who says that $3 million was given to this lobbying firm, APCO, and it was supposed to indirectly benefit the Clintons. Well, if you go back and look at the Clinton Global Initiative report from 2010 and 2011, you find out that, lo and behold, APCO was doing a lot of in-kind work for the Clintons. So everything he's saying can be independently verified.
So the Clintons' number one excuse is, well, she's only one of 9 separate departments. So she doesn't control the departments. She didn't sign off personally on it. What is your answer to their response, their talking point?
Well, first of all, Sean, she was a lead agency in the CFIUS review, and that's key. But also, it's irrelevant what the other 8 people voted for. If you have a committee of 9 and one person gets bribed to vote affirmatively for something and the other 8 vote affirmatively because they think it's a good idea, it's still bribery. And that's the sort of the heart of the issue here. The other thing we have to factor in, Sean, is that this is the Clintons essentially monetizing national security. People say to me, oh, this is history. She's not president. Why do we care? We care because the precedent it sets. If you let people in Washington, D.C. monetize something, they're going to do it. And given what's happened, there is no reason we could not have a Secretary of Defense a couple of years from now say, I'm going to set up a foundation. I'm going to take all this foreign money from interested parties. My spouse is going to go out and give all these paid lectures, and there's not a thing you can do to stop it because the Clintons did it, and nobody objected to it then. So this goes to the heart of the integrity of our national security system and the decisions that are made.
Really scary. And again, the Russia connection is on Hillary's side. Amazing work. Thank you so much. We appreciate it, Peter Schweitzer. When we come back, how is it possible the news media in this country, I've told you journalism is dead, has missed the biggest story in their lifetime? How is it possible? Sean Spicer, Joe Concha, next. All right, so the media's hatred of President Trump is once again on full display. Just listen to this.
It feels like we've reached a level of crazy in this White House, and it's difficult to take it anymore. Reality TV appearances, tabloid gossip, conspiracy theories, name-calling, vulgarities, and a level of egomania few have ever seen in Washington. And that's saying something. It's like we're living inside a parody from 3 years ago. Consider, what would happen if Donald Trump became president?
The president runs his Oval Office like a reality show. He tweets like it's a reality show. His actions, many of his actions are like a reality show.
Oh, and by the way, Chuck Todd, he claims to be a hard news, unbiased, objective journalist, but that's not all. Remember how the media reacted to President Trump's idea of having a military parade. Let's see, how many award ceremonies are there out there in Hollywood? Take a look at this insanity.
That's right. Trump wants a military parade. So you're just going full dictator now. Just wasn't enough.
I guess he wants his toy soldiers to march in front of him in line in lockstep.
Some said it would put us in the same category as folks like Russia and North Korean leaders, where they love a military parade.
The idea that we have to look like Red Square is just absurd.
Maybe the answer, Joe, is to just get Donald Trump a military uniform with epaulets on the shoulders and give him some salad dressing to put on the left lapel and let him march around.
All right, I said it before, I'll say it again. The left-wing Destroy Trump media is missing the biggest story of their lives. Here with reaction, former White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer and The Hill's Joe Concha. You know, you go back and you actually see that this wouldn't be the first time, Sean. FDR, the beloved FDR, had this happen, and Eisenhower had something similar, and let's see, JFK, not a full display, but they had their own displays. And then I think of every Hollywood award ceremony, every music ceremony, but we can't have an honoring parade of the military? Really? Why is that so hard?
Well, I thought a couple things were interesting. One is everyone jumped to the immediate conclusion of associating with a dictator, as opposed to somebody who actually loves and respects the military and wants to honor them for their service. It's amazing. I thought of the people that you played that clip with, and maybe I'm wrong, so I apologize if I am, but I don't think a single one of them has ever served. And I think it's funny that when you have a president who respects and honors law enforcement, first responders, and the military, and says, I'd like to have a parade to showcase them to the American people, that's somehow a negative thing. Less than 1% of the American people have served in the military these days, and we feel more and more connected from those who do and those who deploy every day to go protect our freedom. And when you have a president who wants to honor them and show the respect that they deserve and maybe make them a little closer to the other Americans that haven't been able to meet someone who has served before, I think that's a positive thing for our country. And to see so many members of the media immediately jump to negative conclusions,
it's unbelievable.
Really shows how disconnected they are, not just to the military, but to what's going on in this country.
It's like the time for honoring themselves in Hollywood will soon come to an end. I think I saw that in Gladiator.
Right. Just hold on. Sean, in contrast, when the president decided not to go to the White House Correspondents' Dinner, it was a national tragedy. He was disrespecting the First Amendment. Oh, it was the end of the earth. The apocalypse is coming. But when he wants to have a parade to honor the military, oh, by God, that's horrible.
You know, you think about it, I added up, it was something like 25, 30 between the music industry and the Academy Awards, the Global Awards, this awards, Joe Concha. I think it's actually a great idea, and I think the country, we owe them a debt of gratitude, and any way to honor them, I think, is well worth it.
I think because President Trump's name is involved in this proposal, Sean, that is causing the reaction. And you could play a game of PU, it's called Parallel Universe, where you take the name Trump out and you put in a name like Chuck Schumer. And what if Chuck Schumer had actually proposed a military... Oh, that's right, he did in 2014. And there wasn't a sniff of outrage around that. But to one point, though, you could honor the military with the parade. No problem. The costs are down. Logistically, you could pull it off. No problem. But I think also the president really could back up those words and back up a parade by actually going to Afghanistan and visiting the troops. He hasn't done that yet. And I think that will go a long way in showing that he's just not doing this for show, as his critics are charging.
Well, I think that'll all happen, but even if he does that, I'm sure he'll be criticized. How did they miss the biggest story of their lifetime, Joe Concha? The rest of the media? How did they get it so wrong on Trump-Russia collusion?
Well, have they got it wrong? I mean, I believe the investigation is still going. We shouldn't get ahead of ourselves on it. There hasn't been any evidence presented.
Let me put it this way.
No.
Is there any evidence in over a year that you've seen?
No, there hasn't been any evidence presented. And remember, everything gets leaked these days, so if they did have something, it probably would end up in the hands of the Washington Post and the New York Times. So, no, not yet, but let Mueller finish his investigation before we start saying that there isn't any
I don't think Mueller
evidence
should
here
have been
whatsoever.
there in
But
the
now it
first
doesn't
place.
look like it.
I mean, based on what we've learned just in the last week with the Nunes memo and the unredacted Grassley-Graham memo, Sean Spicer, seems to me that this whole thing was a witch hunt from the get-go.
Well, we'll see. I want the investigation to play out only because I do believe that the president's been very clear from the beginning and everyone involved in the campaign that there was no collusion. So at some point you run out the clock and you say, as you've noted, that if you haven't found anything by now, let's give it a break. I think that the stuff that they found people for in terms of lying to them and FARA are obviously violations of the law, and those people should be prosecuted. But the underlying premise of this whole thing, that there was collusion from Russia, as you pointed out and Joe corroborated, there's been nothing so far. I think we let this play out. But I think that it's going to be interesting to see where the press goes from there. Because they were wrong about the election. They were so ready to coronate Hillary Clinton. They were all crying election night. And now that they've wrapped themselves around this axle, we'll see where they go from there. Will they admit that they were wrong? Will they vindicate Trump? Or will they move on to the next one? Because I have a feeling that that's what's going to happen.
How did they miss the stories we've been talking about, Joe Concha? How did they miss the bulk of the FISA warrant was predicated on Hillary bought and paid for lies? How do you miss that?
Well, sometimes there's bias, Sean, where it's out in the open and it's very clear that a reporter or an anchor is rooting for a certain outcome. And then there's another kind of bias, and Sean knows all about this, and that's the bias of omission. I mean, when Sean was press secretary, right, I'm sure he was just stunned at the questions that weren't asked of him at a press briefing. Instead, it was concentrating solely on Russia. So, yeah, I think that's a very big story that isn't being covered because they simply do not like the narrative in these situations. By the way, Sean, congratulations. You got a lot of pep.
They want to interview the author, longtime Clinton ally Cody Shearer. Plus, a former State Department official confirms what congressional Republicans have been saying by admitting that he was sharing anti-Trump opposition research from friends of the Clintons with the dossier author, Christopher Steele. That and so much more in our breaking news opening monologue. All right, brand new tonight, Politico out with an explosive report about potential deep state spying on a former top Trump advisor. Here's their headline: FBI surveillance of Carter Page might have picked up Bannon. Now, according to the reporting, Carter Page was being surveilled by the FBI last January during the presidential transition when Page had a phone call about Russia with former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon. Now, according to Politico, Page made this shocking revelation during congressional testimony, and Page said at the time that Bannon called him about canceling a planned television appearance, and then Page eventually brought up the phony dossier, which BuzzFeed had published just a day earlier on January 10th. Now, it's not certain if the conversation with Bannon was picked up by the FBI, but national security experts, they're telling Politico that it's very possible that it did happen. Now, investigative reporter Cheryl Atkinson, who says the Obama administration, you may remember,